coming up on the Knowledge Industry Podcast.
But the thing that will separate you, the thing that will make you more money, is if you can show people your idea. I'm known for my ability to think in models. If you can help people see your idea, they will hear your idea.
So today's topic is how do you productize and monetize your expertise? Our guest is Neen James. She's a leadership expert, an executive strategist, and a keynote speaker.
Do you sell online courses or run live workshops? Do you have expertise that can help people in life or business? Are you even running an online training empire from your kitchen table? Then you're part of the knowledge industry, a fast-growing industry that means that you can learn almost anything, and anyone can create a business around what's between their ears. Welcome to the Knowledge Industry Podcast with your host, Mark Egan.
So Neen, great to finally talk to you. We've been trying to track you down for ages. You're so busy traveling all over the place, but set the scene. Where are you now? What glamorous location are you in?
You're joining me from my home studio in Tampa, Florida. So I used to live on the east coast of the US for like 15 years. And then before everyone went into lockdown, before the craziness that is happening in the world at the time of recording, I ended up moving to Florida. And so I was very glad to be in this beautiful place. But the accent originally from Sydney, Australia.
One thing I really love, just, watching interviews that you've done and looking at your website, you've got such a great personal brand. I mean, obviously it's your personality shining through that. But then when I look at your background, you were in banking, which to me, maybe it's a stereotype, but banking isn't something that screams, personality, fun, whoa. So how did you go from you're in Australia, then you're in banking to what you do now?
I was so fortunate. I grew up in corporate business in Australia, like you said. So I worked in retail banking, telecommunications, and the oil industry, Mark. Now, at the time, there were not a lot of chicks in oil, right? But when I decided that I was constantly getting attention for being the person who could get things done, right? They would give me projects that were behind. They would give me the fundraising projects. Like, I was the girl who could stand up in front of hundreds of people and convince them that they needed to write checks for $10 million. I mean, I was literally that girl. And so I kind of took a lot of that for granted. And then when I decided to leave the corporate world in Australia and start my own business, someone said to me once, "You should be a speaker." And I was like, can you make any money doing that? Well, Mark, and because you do this, there is a whole industry dedicated to professional speaking. So I was so fortunate early in my career, Mark, to see this gentleman at the front of the room. I'll never forget. I walked into this hotel room in Sydney. It was in like a basement of a hotel. And there's this man, pretty good looking, high energy, and he was sharing all his secrets about running a speaking business. And I thought to myself, this guy's crazy. He's giving all his intellectual property away. He gave people templates and ideas. I wrote notes furiously, but I was still a corporate girl. And I remember going up to him afterwards and I was like, "Are you crazy? You just gave this whole audience all of your tools for your business." Now, understand, Mark, I was a corporate girl. We had lawyers to protect our IP, right? And he said to me, he was like, "Neen, they're not going to use it." And I was like, that's really fascinating. So I ended up stalking him and asking him to be my mentor. Mark, I asked him for 6 months to be my mentor. And when I first asked him, I was like, "Okay, well, I'd like you to be my mentor." And he was like, "Yeah, no, I don't think so." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, what do you mean you don't want to be my mentor?" But he's one of the greatest speakers in Australia and basically in the world. He's been named one of the top 25 speakers. His name is Matt Church. And Matt Church, for me, Mark, was the person who could demonstrate not just how to commercialize your intellectual property, but how to build a brand. He had built an entire $1 million practice around his name. That was fascinating to me. So he became my mentor, my friend. We became business partners. But he was definitely one of my role models early in my career. And I got to tell you, being mentored by him probably saved me 5 years in my career of speaking. So when I wanted to pursue professional speaking, he was the benchmark. He was the one everyone looked to. He was the role model. So I was like, well, he's the perfect mentor. And I've always believed that. So whether you are building a business, whether you're showcasing intellectual property, whether you're trying to build your personal brand, who are the people who are doing it exceptionally well? Watch them, learn from them. Now, banking is interesting because you wear a uniform, but I got to tell you, in the bank, I was like the youngest bank manager that they'd had in that particular company and 33,000 employees. I won the trips. I was always upselling the existing clients because I also could listen to what clients were telling me across the counter as a little bank teller. And I'd say, well, have you got our insurance? Have you booked through our travel agency? And so I think this whole idea of how do you make people's lives easier? How do you pay attention to what they're saying has been a through line in all of my body of work.
Now, I just want to rewind to one thing you spoke about there. You said that Matt Church, he was there, he gave everything away. And at the end, you said, you've given away all your great stuff. And he said, well, they're not going to use it. Tell me a little bit more about what was his thinking there about why has he given all this great value and people are not going to use it?
If you've ever had the ability to work with Matt Church, if you've ever seen any of the work that he does, he wasn't saying no one would use it. He was saying that even in like the generosity of giving everything, people have to take action, and not many willing people are doing that, like maybe less than 1%, right? So if you even go to mattchurch.com and then you go /books, everything he's written, he gives away. He gives away his books. I mean, how many thought leaders do you know in the world who are just like, here's my IP, right? Because he also believes that if you can help create thought leaders, then the more thought leaders we have on the planet who are doing good in the world, the greater the world will be. And so his philosophy of generosity is in everything that he does. He started a whole business school for thought leaders. I'm a part of the Thought Leaders Global Movement with him. So I feel like it speaks a lot to an unfortunate thing that many of us hear all this great information. We have access to some of the world's greatest speakers. Nowadays, a TED Talk, a tweet, an Instagram post. We can learn from experts all over the world. But the people who take action are the exception.
And in that case, you were the exception, weren't you? Because you went up, spoke to him, you made sure he was mentoring you. And then you...
Oh, I stalked him.
Yeah, you stalked him. Hey, well, I was trying to put a better spin on it. You know, you make it sound criminal. That's fine. But then earlier you were talking about... sounds very dodgy.
That's a persistence lesson too, though, Mark, right? You never know when someone's looking at your website. You don't know whether they're paying attention to your tweets. You don't know. And so you have this responsibility to be able to put great content into the world that is worth sharing, but you just never know who's watching.
Now, when you go back to that point where you thought you saw him on stage, you thought, yes, I like this. He's helping people. He's got his kind of particular message and all that kind of thing. You must have then had a process of looking back at yourself and thinking, well, I'm good at this. I'm good at this. I'm good at this. How did you decide which bit of what you can do you decided to specialize in? Or did you just do a bit of everything and see how it worked?
Sweet, you thought I even had that intelligence. I didn't have that intelligence, Mark. I didn't look at myself and go, oh, I'm good at this, I'm good at that. I really didn't have that, because here's the other thing that I've realized is sometimes our thought leadership is quite intuitive, meaning we've probably been learning the same lesson our whole life. It's just we've learned it more than others, therefore we can teach it better than others. Doesn't mean we've mastered it. It just means that, hey, you've had a lot of experience in it. And I remember there was this great little bench in a park in Sydney, and I remember sitting there overlooking the Sydney Harbour with Matt, and it was when I was very new into establishing myself as a speaker and trying to learn as much as I could from him. And we were talking about topic and topic development, because as you know, a lot of professional speakers specialize in a particular topic. And I was like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what I'm like good at. And he said, he was like, well, you're famous for getting things done. You're always the person who can get everything done. I was like, yeah. And he said, well, what about productivity? And I was like, productivity? That's not a sexy topic. Why would I talk about productivity? Like, everybody's productive. And he was like, well, actually, no, Neen, they're not. And so it was interesting to me that sometimes our thought leadership, our expertise, our experiences are so close to us. They're so ingrained in us. You're like, well, of course everyone knows how to get things done. Just because I didn't mean everyone else did. And I think that's a key lesson for listeners, is that you could be just so good at something that if I invited you to reverse engineer that, you could teach me how to do it, but you just kind of make assumptions everyone's good at it. Mark, think about your work in video. You've grown up. It's intuitive to you. You know about lighting. You know about all of the speeds. You know about setup, environment, all the beautiful camera angles that are available. But to you, you just know it. And so when you teach other people about that, they're like, oh my God, that's revolutionary to them. But you're like, seriously? Like, turn a diva light on and we'll all be good. Like, you just know this stuff, I think that's one of the things that's interesting. So to find your expertise sometimes is very close to you, and sometimes someone else has to highlight it to you.
Well, You made the point about, something that you think is obvious. That was really driven home to me when the lockdowns first started happening. And you had celebrities, you had prime ministers, you had all sorts of people appearing on Zoom. And it looked like a hostage video. It's like, where is your lighting, your framing? What's wrong with you? And to me, that just is completely obvious. And I can see from you, I know, because you have been out and you've been speaking, you're doing stuff about leadership and all that kind of thing. Going from stage, must have been that point for you as well, where it was now you have to try and communicate in the way that you do so well on stage, but now you're having to do it purely from your home office on a camera. How did that work out for you?
For your listeners, I want to encourage them to go back and listen to the great episode you did with my friend Ryan Avery. Ryan, I met when he was first new in his speaking career, and I'm so proud watching the way that he is just literally changing the world. And so one of the things that he was talking about was communication and being able to do that. And it was interesting too, you did an interview with my friend John, who has photographed some of my virtual events for me, John DeMatteo. And you two were talking about, and it was your comment, I think, Mark, where you said, having worked in radio where you don't have an audience around you, you've got to set the energy, you've got to set the tone, you've got to create this experience for people. And I loved that conversation. So 2 episodes everyone needs to listen to.
Oh.
But what I have been doing, I've been presenting virtually for 20 years, Mark, because my corporate clients are global. And so it wasn't uncommon for me to have an audience in the room around a board table in a massive, beautiful corporate office in New York, but it beaming out to all of their offices, right? So I'm very used to dealing with camera. I've also done a lot of TV. I sit and did YouTube, so the video doesn't concern me. And Zoom, I've been using Zoom for ages before we, started to get Zoom fatigue. And so what I had to have the ability to do, though, is I am incredibly interactive. So my clients hire me. They all call me the Energizer Bunny. That's what the meeting planners name me. And they're buying my energy. They want me to open their conference and set the tone, or they want me to speak after lunch to keep the energy up. And so what I had to be able to do, and I often pull people on stage with me. So I have this thing that I do where I can help position someone in their brand within moments by asking them questions. It's very fun. The audience loves it, and I adore doing it. Well, I had to work out, how do you do that on Zoom and have that kind of mic drop moment for the person who's in the hot seat, right, on camera? So my beautiful little office that I loved in Tampa, Florida, we had to switch everything around. I used to look at the water. Now I look at blank wall with a whiteboard in front of it. But my studio had to be set up with flip charts and whiteboards and lights everywhere. 1, 2, 3, 4 lights, so it looks like, oh, she looks so natural. No, nothing about this is natural. So I had to set up a studio. But in full disclosure, I bought a lot of the equipment, Mark, and I didn't use it. I have the most fancy camera with the biggest lens, blah-de-blah. John would be horrified, still in the box. And I bought it as soon as we went into lockdown. So just so people understand, I had to do what worked for me. I don't use a lot of PowerPoint, barely ever. And so when I would say to the client, I have no slides, and they'll be like, oh my God, but it's a virtual call, because my style is interactive. So Mark, I had to adjust everything. Not just how I interacted, not just how I set up, but sometimes I change out. I always have fresh flowers in my office, always. But I didn't have them this morning for our recording, but I have champagne bottles, part of my brand is champagne. So having something in the background you can talk about. There were just lots of adjustments I had to make. But you know what? I really, really, really miss live audiences, but I also love sleeping in my own bed. I love eating my own food. I love that I can do a show in 6 a.m. in Singapore, a lunchtime manufacturing group, and for their lunch and learn, and I can do a 6 p.m. with Australia, New Zealand. I love that I can do multiple shows in a day, which I never had the luxury of when I was on the road.
I can completely understand that.
So it's different.
Maybe I'll get a bunch of beer cans at the back for my personal brand. I'm not sure it worked quite as well.
As long as they have a story. As long as they have a story. I think if you're going to have props, I do believe you should have a story. I got Adam Grant, who I love. I have such a crush on his brain. And he spoke for one of my clients recently, Virtuoso Travel. And he was great. He's just genius. He's current and relevant, and his books are fantastic. His latest book, Think Again, is one of my faves. But he had this amazing green stuffed toy frog in the background while he was doing his keynote. And half the time I was thinking, he's going to get to the frog, right? He's going to tell me about the frog. And then I realized, it's just a cool frog. So I think if you're going to have like prompts, they either need to have a story or it's just part of like who you are and the quirkiness or your personal brand kind of thing. So yeah, I think if you're going to set up your environment, to your point, you need to have, people need to see your beautiful face and they need to hear you. But you're in my home. You can see my baby sister photos. You can see things that I love. So I made it very welcoming. So my conversations are as relatable as I am on stage, but you have to create that in the background too, which is why I'll never use a virtual background.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I could put it this way, even without a webcam, your kind of personality and energy would still come through. Now, talking about, you've got your kind of expertise, things like productivity, leadership. You've written books. If somebody's thinking, right, I do have an area where I'm pretty good at, but I need to monetize that. What would be your advice to say, okay, there are lots of other people speaking about whatever topic it is. How do I stand out? What would be your advice on that?
I think in discovering your thought leadership, there's several really important steps. You want to think about, maybe if you're trying to even work out what your thought leadership is what is that lesson you've been learning your whole life? Doesn't mean you've mastered it, but it's something you have a lot of experience in. That points you to at least some sort of contextual topic. And then the next thing that I often ask people when they're trying to discover their thought leadership is what makes you crazy in the world? So for me, for example, it makes me crazy if someone is rude to staff members when I'm in a restaurant, at a hotel. It makes me crazy when people are like on their phones instead of having a conversation with the good-looking human who's in front of them. Stuff makes me crazy. And what I realized was because I just want the world to pay attention. Right? And pay attention with intention is something that's really important to me. So sometimes your thought leadership, it's a lesson you've been learning or what drives you crazy in the world. And then the next thing you got to think about is, yes, there will probably be 100 books published in what you think is your thought leadership. So read them and grab a pad and then write down on one side, yes, I agree with this. And here's what I'd add from my experience. And on the other side of the pad, write, yes, but here's where I disagree with that. Right? So Tim Ferriss wrote a very famous book, The 4-Hour Workweek. Well, that's great. But I don't know any of my clients who can do their job in 4 hours a week. And I certainly don't know any of them who can do email in a month. That's just dumb. I've never agreed with that. But his concept about creating a lifestyle that you want is a great part of the book. So what you want to think about as a thought leader is, yes, there'll always be people who've published ahead of you. And you can sometimes walk into a bookstore, I've done it, and then you pick up a book and you're like, oh, that's the book I wanted to write, right? That's just going to happen if you want to publish. But you got to think about, yes, and the people are saying this in the world, but what's your take on it? Yes, but here's where you disagree with it. And it's okay to disagree with people. David Allen wrote a very good book about getting things done. It's fantastic. My life is never going to consist of making lists and reprioritizing them and rewriting them. But for some, there's so many key elements in his book that are great. So what's your thought leadership? When I wrote one of my books, Folding Time, which I wrote a bazillion years ago, and happy to give that to you, Mark. You can put it in the show notes. Everyone can have a free copy. I'll send you the PDF. We converted it with COVID.
Fantastic.
But one of the things I said back then is time management's out the window. It's a stupid idea. You can't manage time. That's nutso, because we only get 1,440 minutes in a day. So find something that does make you crazy and then start talking about it. But the thing that will separate you, the thing that will make you more money, is if you can show people your idea. I am a huge advocate and I'm known for my ability to think in models. I create contextual models for my clients because if you can help people see your idea, they will hear your idea. And if they can hear your idea, they will share your idea. So my belief is a great contextual model that is uniquely yours will help not only showcase your intellectual property, but it'll help commercialize your intellectual property because you'll be the person with the model that is uniquely yours. So I've created contextual models for some of the world's greatest thought leaders, and they show up in books and speeches and on websites, and some of my clients, I've worked with them, and that's really fun. But what I want you to start thinking about is contextual models are really just squares, circles, or triangles, and sometimes they're smushed together. And in the world, we have famous contextual models. You just hadn't maybe thought about them. Remember the old food pyramid, Mark? It's just a triangle. It's not as relevant now, but it was back then. If you even look at Stephen Covey's work, the late Stephen Covey said it was basically the urgent versus the the important, and it's a quadrant model. It's just a square. So we have thought leaders in history. If you look at Simon Sinek's talk, it's great, but it wouldn't have been as great if he didn't put the circles on the flip chart. That's when people went, oh, I see what he's trying to say. So thought leaders need contextual models. In my practice, we call that idea shaping. And so helping you shape your ideas so you can share them within the world. And the contextual models can be used in 1,000 different places, but make it yours. The moment you have a contextual model, I promise you can stick your fees up.
What's the psychology behind that?
You're the only one who can explain.
Yeah, I mean, what's the psychology behind that in the sense that, like you say, let's say it was leadership or thought leadership, maybe it was productivity, attention, any of these topics, just by kind of giving it a particular name of a process or an idea or a thought, giving it a triangle, a square. Why do you think that makes such a difference? And I know you were kind of mentioning that in your last sentence, but what's the psychology of somebody thinking, well, they've got something that's got a name and it's, got 4 points around a square, then I'm going to go to them instead. What do you think is the psychology behind that?
It's all about attention, because when you think about, as babies, we learn how to see things. We recognize our parents' faces, right? And so we understand when we see that there's a response. So we are visual learners, and we start this really young. We also learn as a baby that if we cry, someone will pick us up. Okay, so this is where we learn attention. We learn attention from a super young age, right? We also, when we think about how we teach little ones, we teach them about putting squares in squares, circles in circles. The toys we design for them are around shapes and visual imagery, right? So we're learning these lessons very much from a young age. But we've also realized that when it comes to contextual models, in a snapshot, you can showcase something so quickly. Not everyone wants to read the 5 paragraphs in your book, but if you give them the model, for the people who tend to be more strategic, who really appeal to this, the way their brain works, they're like, okay, got it. Now think about the way, Mark, that we're wired. Some people tend to really use the left hemisphere of their brain. It's a little bit more dominant. And by the way, we use the whole brain, but they love models. They just love them. Give them a bar chart, a pie chart. Oh, they're so happy, right? The big picture thinkers who are left brain love it. The right brain people, who tend to be more right hemisphere and they're strategic, they love a great metaphor. If they can paint a picture in their brain, right, they'll help you remember it. And remember, metaphors are memorable, repeatable, retweetable. So let's just say you want to showcase your intellectual property. A great model, a great metaphor. Hello, you're going to elevate your messaging instantly because you're the only one who's talking about that. People are still talking about Stephen Covey's Big Rocks presentation, where he put big rocks in a jar and basically said, these are your life priorities. And then he put all the little pebbles around them. People who are listening probably know what I'm talking about. If you don't, go Google it on YouTube. But I heard a speaker this morning talking about that very story. And if you look at the footage, it's centuries old, but the lessons still remain. So models and metaphors, really cool ways to showcase. The psychology behind it is it's based on the brain and the way that we process messaging.
And another thing I have to ask you about is your personal branding, from your website to when I see you on interviews to just the way you start your emails. It's, good day, gorgeous, something, I think your autoresponder out of office probably is more kind of positive than most people's kind of best emails. But, you were just mentioning about the things you have behind you on camera, and you're talking about the messaging and everything there. It seems to me that your personal brand is really, really coherent. The messaging, the visuals, and everything. How did you go about putting all that together? Is that something that's developed over time, or did you sit back, swig back some champagne, and it came to you in a dream?
Gosh, I wish it was champagne inspired, but champagne is part of my brand, so let's be super clear about that. Here's what happens with your personal brand. Your personal brand is often what people will talk about when you're not necessarily with them, and you don't even know that that's the case. It could be your personality, it could be the colors you wear, it could be the things that you like, and mine was all of the above. And so I was always famous for wearing pink. I had a pink briefcase. I've always loved pink, even in my corporate days. In some of my crazy conservative clients, I would still wear pink, much to the horror of some of the people that I work with. And so when I was starting to create my personal brand, I remember when I first moved out of corporate into my own practice, my brand was pink and purple. And I figured to myself, if I had purple, it was sort of like navy, so it's sort of corporate, so I'd get away with it. So if you look at any of my original stuff, my very first book that I published was pink. I mean, it's so pink, like lollipop pink, okay? And it's not available anymore, but it was my very, very first book. So pink became a part of my brand. Now, whenever I'm on camera, pretty much in my personal life as well, I'm in pink because I love the color. I love the energy that it creates. It's very girly. But look, even like if you get a note from me, it's in a pink envelope. If you get a book from me, it's in a hot pink envelope. I have a pink water bottle. And so branding pink is a part of the choice. Now, here's what else happens. Your audience tells you about your brand. I cannot tell you how many tweets started happening about my shoes. People would post about my shoes. In conferences, people would ask about my shoes. And I was like, what? Now, I love shoes. I would talk about shoes. I have fabulous shoes. I would wear fabulous shoes, but I didn't even know that was a thing. Well, then also, too, I have things like I have little shoe stickers for all of my seals. So I made a very deliberate effort to make my collaterals my own. That's me. I love shoes. I love champagne. So, but I think you've got to be able to back up your personal brand with substance. Yes, I wear pink. Yes, I wear beautiful stilettos. Yes, I drink champagne. Very girly. But I also have to be able to deliver incredibly cutting-edge strategies for the CEO clients that I work with. Because as an executive strategist, that's my job. I consult to some of the world's biggest brands, to all of the C-suite, in order for them to be able to really pay attention to what matters in advance, especially because I work so much in luxury. So you have to look the brand as well. If I'm going to charge you a ginormous fee to consult to you or to speak at your event, I better look like I'm worth it. And so that also extends to the stationery I use, the website they visit, the books that they receive. I give my clients Tiffany. That is something I'm famous for. I personally love Tiffany, and I use Tiffany. And so some meeting planners will say to me, Neen, that's the first Tiffany I've ever got. Well, that's just sad. But isn't it great that I could give them that treat? Because Tiffany is an extension of my brand. Does that make sense,
Absolutely,
Matt? So
Neen. Yeah, absolutely. Everything you say makes sense. It's quite scary.
But thinking, I remember there was this man and he was in a very blue collar, amazing business. He was genius. And then he started giving his clients Tiffany because he heard me talk about it. And the clients were like, what do I do with this? Like, it was just so off-brand for him. It made no sense, right? And I was like, well, let's just ideate around what would be a good client gift for you. And he totally changed and the clients loved it. So just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
But interestingly, I know a lot of people who, some people who do fantastically well with corporate clients and some who don't. And it may just be a perception, but one of the things I think that people do wrong is to appeal to corporate clients. They try and be so corporate that they think that's a kind of a perfect match. When actually, I think sometimes corporates are trying to bring in something they don't have from outside. I mean, why do you think you've been so successful with appealing to those big international corporate clients?
I grew up in corporate, and so I know corporate, and I lived corporate. I had the Navy suit. I wore pantyhose, for goodness sake. I carried a briefcase. I mean, seriously, like, I was that look. And then when I left corporate, I thought I had to still look that way, right? And so I wore, the just very corporate stuff, right? And I did okay because I knew corporate. But then when I started to think, I'm just going to wear my pink dress on stage. I'm going to wear my sneakers. I'm going to wear my stilettos. I'm going to carry my pink briefcase into this law firm in New York City on the top floor. And the managing partner's like, what is this? I literally remember him stopping in the hall going, what? Like, who are you? And I was like, you hired me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like, yes. But I think people often say, yes, corporate does want an alternative perspective, but you better understand the business. You better know how what you're offering is going to grow their bottom line, is going to attract and retain top talent, is going to make their leaders more successful, going to make them stronger communicators. So yes, I'm this little 4'10.5", very important that half, 4'10.5", and I wear pink and I sound like I'm 5 years old. But yet, the heads of these organizations will text my cell phone when they have a question. But you got to earn that right. I know a lot of professional speakers who say, I want to work corporate. No, they want corporate fees. to work corporate, you've got to be able to understand corporate challenges, speak corporate. I know for all of my corporate clients, who is their successor? What are their KPIs? What is their massive big goal for the year? Who is the talent they're trying to attract? Like, I know all the intricacies of my corporate clients. So when I stand on stage in front of them, I know their acronyms, I know the charities that they support, I know what boards their particular leadership serve on. That's part of my job, right? So I think people want to have corporate income, but they don't necessarily want to do corporate effort. It's very different, right? And because my strategy, Mark, when I built my practice was to go in very high and go very deep. So of the, my dozen of my favorite clients, I can email with the CEO, CMO, CRO very regularly, and I am then invited to talk to their teams, and then they invite me to talk to their teams and work one-on-one. That's why doing executive strategy work, I love it, because I can talk corporate, but I can talk corporate as an entrepreneur who runs her own practice. It's just me and Sue, my sales goddess. It's only two of us. Like, that's my team, and that's the practice that I'm running. So you've got to work out, just because it looks appealing doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. And I work a lot in luxury, and I love luxury. That's like my life. That's my choices. You've seen my Instagram. I love beautiful, amazing experiences. And so working in that industry for me is very, very fun.
Well, you obviously do it very well. A couple of quick things I want to touch on before we wrap up. Firstly, you've mentioned a little bit about like your training to be interactive and pulling people on the stage and all that kind of thing. What is your approach to, how you teach your expertise? What's your kind of mindset around that?
I don't teach my expertise, Mark. What I simply do, it's not a presentation, it's just a conversation. Right. And so I approach everything from a conversation point of view, which is why I deliberately don't use slides. Now, on massive big stages, of course, I have to have some slides. But what I tend to do is make it more conversational. So the key to that for me, Mark, is you have to set up interaction in the first 2 minutes. So within the first 2 minutes, I help the audience understand. I make fun of myself very quickly. Self-deprecating humor as an Australian, that's really all I've got. Self-deprecation and sarcasm. My American clients don't understand sarcasm. So I have to use just self-deprecating, right? So I set it up, I make it fun within those first 2 minutes to grab their attention and tell them, this is the rules, this is how we're going to play together today. So when I start to ask them to play with me on Zoom or in a ballroom or in a boardroom, then instantly they feel comfortable. My job is to set the environment where I say, let's just have a chat about this. Very conversational. Now, my chat has very specific points I want it to address. It has KPIs that I've agreed with the client, like all of those deliverables, but I want them to feel part of the conversation. I'm never going to be a good talking head. I'm never going to be a person who can do the exact same speech every time. That's not the way I'm wired. I'm no good at that. I don't choose to do that. So what I choose, Mark, is for a conversation. So wherever I can, I create that. So whether it's a webinar, whether it's a boardroom strategic planning I'm doing, whether it is a keynote in a ballroom, the more you can have people involved. So my process is set up engagement super, super early. But the show starts before the show starts, because I think you're on before you're on. So I have this process called BDA, before, during, and after my time with a client. So before I spend time with a client, I've interviewed their key stakeholders. I've read all of their literature. I know all their acronyms. I also make sure I shoot a little video, which you might be happy about, but I always shoot a promo video that says, I can't wait to see you all. Let's start our conversation early. Here's how you stalk me on social. Here's my email address. And I give them access, right? I answer all those things. And then when I arrive on site, let's say, for example, it's a keynote, I meet the crew. The AV crew are the most important people in the room, right? I take them coffee, I give them treats, I make sure I do everything right for them. And then I meet all the audience as much as I can. I go early, I hang out, I watch other speakers when we were actually attending conferences. And then I make sure that my keynote is fun and energetic. And then afterwards, I sign all the books, I take the selfies, I talk to everybody who wants to connect. I post on social, I repost all of their kindness. But then it doesn't just stop there. In the keynote, I give them something to do to interact with someone that they sit with, so that in 30 days, I send them the after piece, which is another video that says, hey, did you do what you said you would do when we were together? So I'm constantly in conversation with people. So my process, BDA, before, during, and after. Obviously, it has a whole lot of checklists and a whole lot of systems that sit behind that. But in its simplest form, every listener could come up with their own BDA. What do you do before the engagement or the opportunity? Whether you're a coach, trainer, mentor, facilitator, speaker, it doesn't matter what your modality is, but you can have a process as well. And that way it makes it more than an event. People want to look forward to spending time with you. So you've got to give them those opportunities to start to get to know you, to be able to serve them. I was at a conference in Vegas, my most favorite conference of the entire year for the luxury travel industry with Virtuoso Travel. And I came away with literally hundreds of business cards of people that I met and had conversations with. Well, I handwrite, you can see as evidence, I'm not through the pile yet, but I handwrite every single note, to every person I met. And I don't just write them a standard note. I look up their website, I look at their LinkedIn profile, I have a look at their social media. So it takes me a long time to write them, but it means it's so much more connected. That's part of my after process. Does that help answer your question?
No, that's incredibly interesting, actually, because certain things there are things I agree with, not just turning up, giving a talk and then leaving, getting to the conference, meet people, get a sense of it. Speak to the AV people, or if you have translators, make sure you make friends with them. What you completely blow me out of the water with is aftercare, because I need to get my pink notes. So I think that's really, really good. The other thing that you mentioned, and I've seen this, somebody listening to this won't realize this, but before we even hit record, you first of all, you made sure you understood who the audience was. You were chatting to me about what you could talk about that would best be able to serve people. You had obviously done your research on previous podcasts and, what we had talked about and all that kind of thing. And I think that level of detail or that level of attention means that obviously every interaction you have is going to be high quality rather than kind of saving a little bit of effort, but maybe not producing what the audience needs or making it a good use of your time. So that's something you do consciously, is it?
Yeah, and this is not supposed to be morbid, but one thing that I'm often conscious of is, what if this was my last day today? What if this was my very last podcast? What if this was my very last speech? What if this was my last opportunity for us to connect? I want to make sure that it is the most intentional use of our conversation, my attention, our time, and our energy. And so I tend to live that way, trying to be much more mindful. And look, do I do it every day? I wish, but I try to be so in the moment that it is going to be incredibly rewarding for both of us. And so because attention has been something that has been so important to me my whole life, not so much the getting of attention, but I love it, just for the record. I stand on the stage for a living, for goodness sake. That is an attention business. But I love giving attention because I feel like everyone on this planet, Mark, wants to be seen and heard. So part of my job in life is to make sure every person I'm with feels very seen and feels very heard. Does it take extra time? Yes. Is it worth it? 1,000%. Because the lovely David from Join Up Dots is the one who connected us. Well, I want to honor that relationship because I was on his show a bazillion years ago. And then I listened to the show the two of you did together, which is awesome. It's like I was having a beer with you. Not that I drink beer, but I would have champagne because we would all sit around the pub and we would be talking about, that's what it felt like to me, right? And so I feel like we have to make those choices in our daily life, whether it's the people we share our lives with, whether it is the team that we serve, whether it is the clients that we serve. My job is to stand in service. So what does that look like? So for me, there are systems of attention that I put in place to make sure whenever I'm on a podcast, I've listened to several episodes. There are certain systems that all of the listeners could put in place if they want to pay more attention. Systems of attention.
Great. Now, one just final wrap-up question. If there was one takeaway, because like I say, you've got books, your presentations, we can't fit all that into one interview, but from what you were saying about attention, talking about productivity, leadership, what would be if there's one takeaway that, you've got people's ear for 30 seconds, what's the one thing you'd want them to take away?
It's intention that makes attention valuable. So when we pay attention, you have a choice. You can pay personal attention, which is about being very thoughtful. You can pay professional attention, which is about being productive. Or you can pay global attention, which is about being responsible and taking care of how we pay attention in the world. So who deserves your attention? What deserves your attention? And how are you paying attention in the world? That's what I want people to think about as they sign out of our podcast today.
Great. Well, I have to say, obviously I consume some of your posts and watch some of your interviews, and, certain things you were saying about, for instance, leaving your phone on the table when you're speaking to people can immediately make them feel that you're less interested in them. And I was like, oh no, I do that sometimes. So yes, I think you're absolutely spot on with everything you're saying. And if somebody wants to kind of find out more and go deeper, and you mentioned the book earlier, what do people do if they want to find out more about you?
Well, lucky for all of us, there's only one Neen James online. So if you Google me, you'll find me. So I play on Instagram every day. My professional stuff's on LinkedIn and Twitter. But that's the best way, is you can just easy cyberstalk. It's super easy. My website, all of the things. It's just neenjames.com.
Great. And there's so many great quotes in this. Normally when I do an interview, I kind of try and pick out a few quotes and put them out on social media. I might just take the one that said there are no chicks in oil. That might, that will get attention. I mean, it's not that kind of show, but it'll get attention.
Yeah, but now it's so much better. But this is a long time ago, Mark. So in all fairness, that would not be the tweetable from this.
Don't worry, I'm just joking. But it's been a pleasure as always. Keep that fantastic energy going, and maybe someday, again, I'd love to kind of cross paths in person. In Vegas would be good. I haven't been to Vegas for a couple of years now, and I'm getting withdrawal symptoms.
Vegas is fun.
Don't stay too long, but it's great. But yeah, thank you.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's how you manage Vegas. Just stay for a little while.
Yeah, before it gets you. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks again.
My absolute privilege. Thanks for inviting me on your show. I love what you're doing in the world.
If you want to get started showing up on video and sharing your expertise, head over to markeganvideo.com to access some of my free training. Don't forget to join the Knowledge Industry group on Facebook, and if you want to connect, head to markeganvideo.com.